Animal protein feeds bacteria in the gut, and that bacteria in the gut changes that animal protein into specific compounds that can trigger heart attacks and strokes. Tonight, here on the other side of medicine, we are going to dive into the connection between the bacteria in your gut, heart attacks, strokes, and obesity, and much more. Hello, everyone. Dr. Christosic here, aka Dr. J. Glad that you're spending some time with us tonight. We've got a lot in store. Just wanted to let you know we're here every single Thursday sharing with you breakthrough news in natural medicine. I've been doing that probably now for close to 30 plus years on the radio and now on this podcast. The Other Side of Medicine is the place where we bring together common sense, science, and Mother Nature. We never want to fool Mother Nature because that is where we are going to get health, long-lasting health. So if you're looking for a natural way to be able to achieve optimal health so you could become independently healthy, then welcome. You're in the right place. So every single week, we have special guests. We have them internationally known and nationally known guests. But right now, I'm on a roll doing a series on the 911 Gut Health Fix. So if you have family and friends that are suffering with chronic disease, then this series, the 911 Gut Health Fix, is really something that they need to learn about, because I can tell you with full surety, your doctor will not tell you about the stuff that I'll be sharing with you today. Now, remember now that you can join my Facebook group and you can get all of the episodes of the podcast we've done in the past just by going to the Other Side of Medicine Facebook group. That's something that you don't have to join Facebook. You can just go to my group by going to Facebook and looking up the Other Side of Medicine Facebook group. Well, let's just dive right into the topic of the evening. This is part 4 in the series of how you can fix the gut without drugs, without surgery, and not only fix the gut to help to make the gut healthier, but it affects the global health of the body. Every single organ, tissue, and cell in the body is affected by what happens in the gut. Remember, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, said all disease begins in the gut, and now research is beginning to validate what he said. So let's just dive into this. I'm going to just move right on over to our slide presentation, and let me just scoot down here and get to the slide that we're going to, oh, there we go. I just passed it right up. Okay, so last week we ended up talking about stress. You know, stress is something just like that certain credit card. You can't leave home without it, and you can't stay home without it either. So we talked about stress last week and how stress affects our gut bacteria. When we have the healthy bacteria inside of our gut, it can help to reduce the inflammatory response that occurs when we have stress. And we all have stress, so we want to make sure that gut bacteria is healthy. We talked about how the healthy bacteria help to produce anti-inflammatory compounds, whereas the bad bacteria produce inflammatory compounds. And we know stress already does that. So when you have stress and you have bad bugs inside your gut, you have a double problem, and that's not good for your overall well-being. We talked about how cortisol is increased and other cytokines and other inflammatory compounds during stressful events. Well, harmful bacteria also produce those inflammatory compounds. And so we want to make sure that we have healthy bacteria in the gut. We have a happy gut. When you do, then you're going to help to manage stress through a natural means. Now, there's a lot of other things you can do to manage stress. And we talk about deep breathing and eating healthy foods and eating mostly a plant-based diet. There's a lot of things you can do, but we ended up talking about that last week. We're going to move in now to tonight talking about the connection between gut bacteria and obesity. So let's look at that. We have basically for decades been telling people that you just need to eat less and exercise more and you'll be at a healthy weight. Well, how's that working out for us? Look around. We have over 70% of people who are overweight. It's not working out. We need to look for a different avenue. The stage for obesity, it starts early in life. We talked about some of the things about how the gut bacteria is so important in that first 3 years, setting the stage. But, we have a social environment, our family, connections, our dietary choices, the metabolic rates that we have inherited from our genes. There's a lot of variables. And then, of course, diet plays a huge part. And then tonight, we're going to be talking about the diet and gut, the healthy gut or the bad gut bacteria affecting our weight. But the research is mounting, no question about it. It's just unquestionable the type of bacteria living inside of your gut, the diversity of the kinds of bacteria. We've been talking about diversity, the multiplicity of different kinds of bacteria living in the gut. That's what you want. And those things, those two factors, the type of bacteria, the diversity of the bacteria plays a huge role in, controlling our weight and keeping a healthy weight. So we know that diet plays a huge factor in affecting what type of bacteria we have in outside of our bodies. About 60% of what type of bacteria we have living in our body is affected by our diet, the intake of diet, and of course, the lifestyle. We talked about stress. We talked about exercise. There's a lot of other variables that contribute. 10% of the type of bacteria you have living inside of your body is only contributed by your genetic makeup. So don't keep on blaming genes. Everybody wants to blame their genetics for poor health. Our genes are not our destiny. The way we control the factors in our life, whether we have health or we have disease, is primarily affected by the choices that we make. So it's not bad genes and bad germs and bad luck. No, it's about the choices. If you're making bad choices, you're going to have ill health. If you make bad choices, you're going to have bad bugs living inside. You're going to have more bad bugs than good bugs. So I don't want to make it sound like the changing the gut bacteria, having healthy bacteria is going to be some magic panacea that's going to make everything just perfect inside your body. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just helping you to understand that the research is clear, that having beneficial bacteria residing in your gut, the gut microbiome, we call it, having a plethora of healthy bacteria with a diverse type of types of bacteria are going to really contribute in a dramatic way to your overall health, including if you're going to have a normal, healthy weight. So that's the claim that I'm going to stake on tonight. I'm going to really make it a point to you that the research is clear. There's a lot of research that's emerging, sharing with the fact that in animal studies and now in human studies, we're starting to see some evidence that give us clues how bacteria in the gut can play a key role in maintaining a healthy weight, or on the reverse end, causing us to have weight gain and obesity and all the complications that go with it, diabetes and heart disease and cancer and all the other risk factors. So tonight, we're going to talk about some of the research. We're going to talk about some of the problems that arise when you have what we call dysbiosis. We've been talking about that over the past several weeks, which is an imbalance of the good and bad bacteria. primarily you want to have about 80% good and about 20% bad. That's just a general, I guess, a rule that we can go by, but you want to have more beneficial bacteria than harmful bacteria. So let's look at some of the research. There's several studies that I said that have been done, and a lot more that are coming, both in animals, and mice are often used. And the scientists found in two different strains of mice that one strain that naturally becomes obese and another strain that naturally stays lean were used in the study. And so what they took was a third group, which were the lean mice, and they had no bacteria in their gut. They just got rid of all the bacteria in their gut. So these are lean mice with no bacteria. And so what they did is they took the bacteria from the obese mice and they put it into the gut of the lean mice that didn't have any bacteria. And guess what happened? The lean mice got fat. They became overweight. Not surprising, because we know now that this gut bacteria has an influence on our weight control. Then they took the bacteria from the lean mice and put it into the lean mice that didn't have any bacteria at all, and they kept the same. They stayed lean. No surprise. Well, interestingly enough, scientists then found about that study. They found out about that study, and they took it to the next level, and they took twins. And they took twins that one was obese and another was lean, and they took the bacteria from the individual with the obese individual, the gut bacteria, and put it into mice that were normally lean, the lean mice. They put the gut bacteria from the obese person into the lean mice, and the mice became obese. No surprise. Then they took again the bacteria from the lean twin, put it into the bacteria of the lean, put it into the gut of the lean mice that had no bacteria in their gut, and the mice stayed lean. So now we're starting to see a pattern here. This is what we're talking about, patterns that we're seeing. And that's what we're going to be talking a lot about tonight. It's not conclusive, and it's still a young science. We're finding out a lot of information. We're starting to build the case for the healthy bacteria playing a major role, but it's a pattern that we're seeing. And that's the key we want to look at. So researchers at the University of Washington, the School of Medicine, they found that obese people had the lowest levels of gut diversity. Remember, I talked earlier about gut diversity. Many different types of beneficial bacteria is healthy to maintain a normal weight. And so high levels of bacteria that are harmful, basically what they do is they suck out the energy from our bodies as well. So we're going to talk more about that. They actually take away the energy that we could be getting from the healthy bacteria. The harmful bacteria, they take away our energy reserve, where the healthy bacteria provide beneficial energy. Basically, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. The beneficial bacteria produce a short chain fatty acid called butyrate. Butyrate has been found to provide up to 15% of our body's energy capacity. Would you like to have 15% more energy? Listen, if you take care of your gut bacteria, make sure they're healthy, you can provide 15% more energy. You don't need energy drinks. You don't need more coffee. You don't need more stimulants. You need to just increase the beneficial bacteria in your gut. It's going to be a really much wiser choice. So This is an interesting thing I'm going to bring up now. I'm going to move over here to this next slide. I found this is to be very interesting. Give me just a minute. Let's just move here. I'll come back to that one. Is that the one I want? Let's see. That's the one I want right there. Okay. So this is an interesting phenomenon. We now know that when immigrants migrate to the United States, and we've been monitoring this and watching this for quite some time, and you might notice that Asian population typically is pretty thin and they're in good shape. But when they migrate to America, we see Asians who become overweight and some obese as well. And so the scientists, what they kind of looked at is the bacteria living inside of the gut of the immigrants, those specifically coming from Asia in this particular study that's you see up on the screen. And before they migrated to the United States, if you look on the far left, it says pre-immigration. This is the type of diversity that they had inside of their gut, the bacteria that they had living in there. If you look at that slide, they were thin, they were healthy, they were low levels and low incidence of disease in their lives. And they had a great diversity. Look at the colors, all the colors, and look at the population. There's a large population of various types of bacteria that were living in the gut of these people who came from Asia. When they migrated to the United States, though, and that's the new arrivals you'll see there, their gut microbiome started to look more like the American microbiome. And they start having less diversity. They start having, and it happened very rapidly, by the way, too. It doesn't take long to shift bacteria to the harmful bacteria or to shift it to the good bacteria, which is really a really interesting thing, but to our benefit, if you've been living an unhealthy life and you start eating healthy and living a healthy lifestyle, the microbiome can shift very quickly towards beneficial bacteria, which is very exciting. So these individuals, the bacteria shifted away from healthy and less diverse, and they started developing more harmful gram-negative bacteria, which depend upon a diet that's low in fiber. Now remember, if you go back to the diet of the people in China, they eat a high fiber diet. They eat a lot of fruits, a lot of vegetables, a lot of whole grains like brown rice and other types of whole grains, beans. This is a tofu. They eat a lot of these things in Asia, which provide a lot of fiber, and the healthy bacteria absolutely go wild over the fiber because they take the fiber, they chomp it up, eat it, and make these what we call short chain fatty acids, which we talked about for the last couple of weeks, which are very beneficial compounds that help to lower blood pressure and lower blood sugar and help the body to communicate with the brain. And we'll talk more about that later, but there's so many things that these short chain fatty acids do. And so when these immigrants moved to the United States, in this study, they were eating a lower fiber diet, and the bacteria that started to grow inside of them looked more like the average American, and it developed bacteria that were harmful. And because they weren't getting the fiber that they were before, the diversity went down, the harmful bacteria start to grow more, and they start to develop more incidence of diseases, and they start putting weight on. So this is another connection we need to watch. And there's a lot more studies to be done. We need to keep a close eye on this. And I'll keep you posted on that here on the other side of medicine. I'm following this stuff real close. So we look at the long-term residents, they got heavier following the American, I call it the standard American diet, SAD. And then you look at the US born second generation of these immigrants, they're overweight. The second generation became overweight already. It didn't take long. And then we just see this pattern going across the board, not only in Asia, but in other countries that are healthy as they migrate to the United States and change to our standard American diet. They start to develop weight problems and other illnesses that they didn't have before. And it's a shocker. They're coming to the land of great opportunity, but little do they know that they're headed for trouble. Disease lurks in the plates of Americans, and the food that we're eating in the grocery stores are just filled with products that are contributing to chronic disease. Okay, well, let's move on to our next slide. I'm going to go back up here and let's see. Yep. That's the one I want right there. Okay, so let's look at this slide here, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But what I really want you to know is that people in America are eating a low fiber diet, and that increases the risk for gaining weight and, of course, lowering the diversity of the bacteria and causing problems with what we call the leaky gut. We talked about that last week, and I'll kind of show you a little bit more about that. But I think it might be a good time to kind of look at that. Let me just kind of move over to that slide on the leaky gut, because I think it's really significant. Let's see if we can go back here. Nope. It's back over here. That's the one I want right there. So the leaky gut, if you weren't here last week, and if you haven't heard me talk about it before, is a phenomenon where the inside of the gut wall, this is in the small intestine now. We have the stomach, and then the large intestine. We have the stomach, and then the small intestine, and then the large intestine. And we're talking about the small intestine right now. And that's where nutrients are absorbed. And when we look at the lining, which we're looking on this slide, when we see this one layer of cells, it looks like a little canister there. These are cells with the little circles in them. These are cells that line the intestinal lining. There's only one cell layer thick, and then we get right into the membrane. Below that is the bloodstream. So we're talking about a very thin layer of cells. Now, on the outside of the cells here in this white area, right on the outside of the cell, is a mucus layer. That's a protective layer. And guess what? The healthy bacteria make that mucus. If we don't have enough healthy bacteria, the production of that healthy mucus is going to go down, and we're going to be more susceptible to this leaky gut, which I'm talking about right here. So we certainly don't want that. And so when you see this cells here, these three cells they're very tight. You see, these are called junctions, and these junctions are very tight. But when the mucus lining gets damaged and inflammation occurs inside the gut, which is very common because of the foods we eat and the lifestyle we have, you start to have these crypts, and they start to open up, and you start to get these gaps that open up inside the gut lining. And that allows toxins and metabolites. These are compounds that bacteria produce that are harmful, that are toxic, and chemicals from the environment. They get inside the bloodstream, and that starts to cause a lot of alarm systems to go off in the body. And we end up with autoimmune diseases and inflammation throughout the entire body. So when we're talking about obesity has been linked to inflammation. We know that obesity and inflammation, they go together. And so we have this inflammation, and then we get these compounds. I call them LPSs. They're lipopolysaccharides. Just remember, LPSs, they're toxic compounds that harmful bacteria make, and they creep through this gap, and these junctions are opened up, and they go inside the bloodstream. And that triggers more problems with gaining weight and obesity. And again, these are things that are happening every day in the lives of Americans, and we're taking drugs to try to correct these problems. And a drug is never going to help to produce a healthy mucus layer healthy bacteria. As a matter of fact, most drugs destroy the healthy, beneficial bacteria. We've talked about that in past weeks. So they've discovered that these lipopolysaccharides, these LPSs, are higher levels in obese mice. And they found them in human beings that are obese as well. So we're seeing these patterns that these lipopolysaccharides, these toxic compounds that harmful bacteria make, are found in obese mice and in human beings in studies. Again, this is a pattern we're starting to see. So the harmful bacteria produce compounds just like the beneficial bacteria produce compounds. The beneficial bacteria produce beneficial compounds. The harmful bacteria produce toxic compounds. You got to keep it simple, but I want you to understand the connection here. And this inflammatory response just doesn't affect gaining weight. It affects every single disease that you can imagine, especially we're talking about heart disease tonight. The connection between heart disease and inflammation is clear, but every chronic disease has inflammatory compounds that are associated with it. So that's something we need to know. So we know that, again, when you have people who have normal weight, this is the key factor. Again, a pattern. People who have normal weight or people who are thinner, normal or thin, are statistically have lower levels of this leaky gut. They have healthier linings of the gut. Once again, this just proves to you that keeping that gut lining will keep you not only thin, but it'll help to prevent other serious illnesses from developing. And that's what we want. Yes, good to be thin, but we want to also prevent chronic disease. So good and bad bacteria are constantly fine-tuning the metabolism of our bodies, and it's controlled significantly by the foods that we eat. No question about it. As I said earlier, up to 60% the diet is affecting the type of bacteria we have living inside of our gut. So the beneficial bacteria, what do? They help to digest food. They help to convert the food into energy. They fight against harmful microorganisms. When we eat food, when we take in substances, even water sometimes, it'll have harmful bacteria that we ingest. The beneficial bacteria fight against those harmful invaders. So we want to make sure we have a good population of healthy bacteria. So it's important to keep in mind having the right balance between good and bad bacteria is important to keep in mind so that we can, keep our army of good bacteria ready for any assaults that we have in the body. So there are some bacteria living in humans that can be good at times, and there are sometimes these same bacteria can be bad. These are called commensal. We talked a little bit about them in the last couple of weeks, but there's a symbiotic relationship. We've talked about this over the last couple of weeks, this symbiotic relationship. Everything works together as a whole for the benefit of the body. So there's these bacteria that live inside of us. Remember I talked about 80% good, 20% harmful. Well, these harmful bacteria can be at bay, kept at bay. They're called commensal. They're kept at bay by the beneficial bacteria if there's enough. And at times, the harmful bacteria, if the condition's right, if we're not eating the right food, if we're stressed, if the bacteria that's harmful gets out of balance, then these harmful bacteria can start causing problems. And one of those types of bacteria, I'm going to give you an example of just one, is called H. pylori. Now, H. pylori is an interesting bacteria because researchers have found, and you might have heard about it, that ulcers are triggered by this H. pylori bacteria. Now, you may think, okay, well, that's a bad thing. These H. pylori are bad boys. Well, yes and no. As a matter of fact, scientists say that the H. pylori has a split personality because it can be beneficial, but it can also be harmful. Remember I talked about Only when the conditions are right will it become harmful. Listen, 50% of the world's population has this H. pylori living inside of their guts and in their bodies, on their bodies. H. pylori lives in 50% of people. And not everybody has ulcers. So they can be living there in a symbiotic fashion, living in a way that they don't cause any harm. As a matter of fact, they can cause some benefits sometimes, because scientists have found where they live inside the stomach can make all the difference in the world, where they take up residence. If they take up residence in the upper part of the stomach, just below the esophagus, they can prevent esophageal reflux, gastric esophageal reflux, GERD. H. pylori can help to prevent that because they lower the acid levels inside the stomach. Isn't that interesting? So this harmful bacteria that causes ulcers, if it lives in the upper part of the stomach, can be beneficial. But if it lives in the lower part of the stomach, closer to the small intestines or in the first part of the small intestines, it can cause ulcers. Isn't that interesting? So it's got this split personality. And so H. pylori living in the lower part of the stomach can even cause cancers, not only ulcers, but it can cause cancer. So we want to make sure that we have the right environment, because again, when you look at the totality of things, 50% of people have H. pylori living inside of them. But is it the good bacteria that these people who don't have any symptoms are keeping the bad H. pylori to get out of control? I think that's probably going to be the outcome that we're going to see in the final outcome that we're going to see from science. But this is really interesting too. Here's another thing when we look at obesity. Scientists found in the British Medical Journal that individuals who had higher levels of this H. pylori had greater levels of the hunger hormone. It's called ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hormone that is released by the body. It's a natural hormone the body releases to make us feel hungry. That's a normal thing and it's good. But when you have a level of ghrelin levels that are produced by people who have high levels of H. pylori that are 6 times higher, you're not going to be satisfied. That's why when you or somebody who has this kind of situation, you may eat a meal, but you're not satisfied. You still want more. And so 20 minutes later, you're standing in front of the refrigerator and you're looking like for something to eat, and you're wondering, why am I here in front of the refrigerator? So 6 times higher levels of ghrelin, the hormone, the hunger hormone, is found in individuals who have an imbalance of bacteria with a high level of H. pylori. So there's more research keeps on pouring in on the effect of different foods on the bacteria and how different bacteria love certain foods. We know that beneficial bacteria love high fiber foods. We talked about that at the beginning of today's program. The bacteria that is harmful doesn't really go after the fiber. They go after the animal products, the animal protein products. They go after the low fiber foods, the white sugar, the white flour, the refined products, the trans fats, the margarines, the adulterated foods, all the snack foods. We're going to go and dive into that deeper tonight. But these are the type of foods, the bacteria that's harmful love. And one specifically that we're going to look at right now is the saturated fat, which comes in animal protein. Once again, I'm going to try to emphasize to you that if you want to eat animal protein, you should eat it in small quantities, not to the level of what people are getting sucked into today with these low carb and high protein diets are going after. They're shifting their bacteria and causing the harmful bacteria to take residence. So those high levels of animal protein in those low carb diets are literally setting up a a prescription for disaster. So my friends, pay attention to what I'm sharing with you, because in the long run, those people are going to suffer with chronic diseases. They may get in the short term some benefits, and that's what Americans love. Short-term benefit. They don't look into the long-term disaster that occurs. So high animal protein in the diet triggers harmful bacteria. And there's hundreds of studies connecting the dots between these foods and the harmful bacteria. Hundreds of studies. Don't believe me, just go into the medical research, do a Google search, and you'll find all this stuff that's coming out in the research. Don't put blinders on just because some author told you to go on a low-carb diet and you're going to lose weight. You can lose weight by eating carbohydrates, yes, healthy carbohydrates, and eating lower levels of saturated fat, lower levels of animal protein. You can still have it if you want it. I'm not going to eat it. You can have my portion. Go ahead and eat it. But you can eat it as long as you eat it in smaller portions. The people around the world who are the healthiest populations have proven, if you look at the blue zones, they've proved it conclusively that those people eat low levels of animal protein, they eat high fiber diets, and they're the healthiest populations on the planet. Look up the blue zones, my friends. You'll see what I'm talking about. Great studies have been done on this. Look to my book, Carbs from Heaven and Carbs from Hell. I reported on the people from the blue zones actually about 6 years before National Geographic broke the story on the blue zones. And that blue zone research that was done was absolutely extraordinary, and they did a phenomenal job. But I reported what they found, not having all the research that they did, just by scouring and studying world populations and studies, and I connected the dots without having a research science team behind me. Check it out, blue zones, and then look at the connection that I found in my Carbs from Heaven and Carbs from Hell book. I have maps of the same regions, the blue zones, that the National Geographic found. So once again, the levels of metabolites that are harmful, and they are 50% higher, harmful metabolites. Now, I give you some names of some of the metabolites. I'm going to give you one. It's called valorobitane. Valorobitane is a harmful bacteria metabolite that it actually increases the levels when you eat a lot of animal protein, and it increases the harmful effects in the body through the liver, because the liver normally burns fat, but this metabolite that's created by these bacteria, harmful bacteria, decreases the ability of the liver to burn fat. So again, by the way, and this metabolite that the harmful bacteria produce, this valorobitane, is a precursor to another compound that we're going to talk about a little bit later that the Cleveland Clinic researchers found. It's called TMAO. This valorobitane is a precursor to TMAO, which then further damages the body by damaging blood vessels and causing heart attacks and strokes. My friends, it stems from the harmful bacteria, and it comes from eating high levels of animal protein. And this is conclusive. There's no question about it. Researchers have found this information to be taken to the health bank. And if you're wise, you'll study this stuff. Just look up this information I'm sharing with you. You'll find on your own that what I'm sharing with you is leading, cutting edge information. So mice and humans both. This is both studies that are found in mice and humans that eat high levels of saturated fat, which is found in animal protein. Animal protein is found in animal protein is high in saturated fats. They had elevated levels of, again, what I talked about earlier, the gram negative bacteria. This is the kind of bacteria that you really don't want to have a lot of living inside your gut. They literally live off of oxygen, and the beneficial bacteria are what we call anaerobic. They don't use oxygen inside the gut. So these gram-negative bacteria inside the intestine increase the production of a substance called trans fat. Now, I'm gonna open up a discussion here that's going to shock some of you, but trans fat is produced by the body. Primarily, it has a place in the body, but in small levels. Now, when you start eating a lot of animal protein, it increases the levels of the production of trans fat, and it can cause inflammation, leading to leaky gut and transporting toxins throughout the body. We talked about that earlier. And this trans fat damages blood vessels, causes heart attacks and strokes. Now, I'm going to take a little sidetrack here and get off talking about the healthy, beneficial gut bacteria and the harmful bacteria living inside the gut. And I want to talk about trans fat that we have been getting in the standard American diet ever since the food processors found a way to take oils like sunflower oil or safflower oil or any oil, and to turn it from a liquid into a solid. It's called hydrogenation. And you might have heard about that before. And so hydrogenated oils, when you take a liquid vegetable oil, remember the margarine, the old margarines, they were able to stand up in just a summer day. You could put them on inside your kitchen table and they wouldn't melt. That's a vegetable oil. It should just melt. But they didn't, because they were hydrogenated. And the process of hydrogenation perverted the oils, and literally the configuration flip-flop from what nature had in store for us. So it took the configuration and went from like this and to that, the configuration of the molecule from this to that. So it tried to fool Mother Nature by providing these oils that would stand up. And furthermore, those oils would then provide the food manufacturers an ability to not allow those oils to go rancid. Now, think about how the food processors went wild, because when they had those hydrogenated oils, they could put them in cookies, in crackers, in cakes. They could put them in snack foods. They could put them in coffee creamer. They could put them in so many different boxed and packaged foods. They could stay on the shelves for months on end, even sometimes years, without spoiling. If you have an oil, a natural oil, those oils will go rancid within a couple months. But those foods could stay on the shelf for years and not go rancid. So the food manufacturers went wild. Well, back in the 80s, now those trans oils came out earlier. The margarines came out back in the 50s or 60s. And for the longest time, the food manufacturers got away with this murder, literally murder. And I'm going to share with you why it was murder. Because in the 1980s, scientists started to find an association between trans fats in those margarines with heart disease and strokes and diabetes and other diseases. And that was in Europe. The scientists here in America found out about this research, and it took them until the 90s before they started to bring this information to the average person here, to scientists. It was the lobbying groups, the margarine industry lobbying groups, that kept this information at bay so people couldn't get it, the doctors, the scientists. And it wasn't until the 1990s that the American Heart Association and other organizations started to research this whole phenomenon of trans fats linked to diabetes, heart disease, and and strokes. And so it took from the 90s to 2015 before anything was done about it. And yet they had lots of information, but it was just shelved. And yet people were dying from heart attacks and strokes from these trans fats, and people were getting diabetes. Diabetes today is rampant in our culture. And that's type 2 diabetes I'm talking about. And this metabolic syndrome, which goes hand in hand with elevated blood sugars, elevated cholesterol, and elevated levels of body fat, the belly, that's some apple belly or the pear belly, increased risk for heart attacks and strokes and diabetes. This is all coming from, partially in a significant fashion though, from trans fats. And the government knew about it. Researchers knew about it, but it was hidden for the longest time. And it took from the 1980s to 2015 before something was done about it. Look how long of a period of time that is. That's 35 years. Look how many people died. Well, then in 2015, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, came out with a statement saying that these trans fats in margarine were unsafe because they cause heart attacks and strokes and diabetes and other diseases. And they were unsafe. And so they banned them. They banned these trans fats, and they said there's got to be 0 trans fats in these foods that we eat that are packaged and in our food supply. 0 trans fats, the FDA. Yay, we applaud them. But hold on just 1 minute. Hold on just a minute. Here's the kicker. You're not going to believe this. This is don't believe me, do some research. And by the way, I was sharing this on my radio program back in the early 90s. I was sharing this on my radio program. People were listening to me. Doctors were calling me quack. People would call up and say, you don't know what you're talking about. But then in 2015, the FDA said, these trans fat are dangerous. And the American Heart Association said that they're dangerous. And Diabetes Association said they're dangerous. The FDA said, they put a clamp down and said 0 trans fats. 0 trans fats should come out into these packaged foods, that they're unsafe. Now, here's the kicker now. Are you ready for this? This is what happened. The FDA allowed, with this proclamation that you have 0 fats, they allowed food manufacturers to put in up to 0.5 grams of trans fats into a packaged food per serving up to 0.5. That's a half a gram of this trans fat, which is dangerous to our health. Worse than any other fat, worse than saturated fat, clearly demonstrated by all the health organizations and all the research, worse than saturated fat. I already talked to you about the dangers and the harm of saturated fat. And these trans fats, going back and linking it to what happens when you have high levels of trans fat with gut bacteria, it also causes damage to the gut bacteria, which then has global effects. So the FDA allowed food manufacturers to have a half of gram of trans fat and still call it 0. They said you can call it 0 trans fat in the food per serving as long as you don't put more than half a gram per serving. Folks, I don't have a calculator here, but on my phone I have a calculator. 0 is 0. It's not a half a gram. Now here's another real problem. Because who in America eats 1 serving? Do you know if anybody eats 1 serving? I don't. When I have a snack, I'll eat 2 or 3 servings of a snack. Sometimes people will eat a whole bag of a snack. It's in popcorn. It's in all kinds of, it's in chips. It's in all kinds of different, chips and muffins and cookies and crackers and cakes and, oh my, all over the place. Half a gram per serving is allowed. Now, this is really interesting because back in the 1990s, I read a statement from the American Heart Association that said 2 to 3 grams, listen to this carefully, 2 to 3 grams of trans fat per day increase your risk for heart attacks and strokes and diabetes, increasing your risk for heart attacks and strokes, deaths from heart attacks and strokes by 28%. 28% increased risk for death from a heart attack because of trans fats. And the FDA said that the food manufacturers could put in a half a gram. So now if you take at one sitting, you had, let's say, 3 servings, you had at 1.5 grams. You had 1.5 grams if you ate some processed food. If you had a coffee creamer, if you had some popcorn, if you had a cookie or a cake or a cracker, or any of these packaged foods, if you ate 1 or 2 servings, you could easily get 1.5 grams, 1.5 grams. You do that 2 or 3 times a day, or 4 times a day, or 5 times a day, you're getting way more than 3 grams of trans fats, my friend. And yet you're told that you're getting 0. My friends, we are being duped. That's why the other side of medicine for so many years has been a leader in sharing with you how to prevent disease and to take charge of your health, take a proactive role, and not sit back passively and accept hook, line, and sinker whatever the food manufacturers are doing on advertising or with the healthcare providers and supposedly protecting our health, like the FDA, are lying to us. My friends, we need to stand up and take care of our health and take responsibility. Our bodies are beautifully made. And so we need to use common sense and stop abusing our bodies by putting these adulterated foods into our body. It's treacherous what's happening. So where do you find these trans fats? You find them everywhere. They're in, as I said, cookies and crackers and cakes and pizza and popcorn. And that's just to name a few. Coffee creamers, they're everywhere. And of course, all those foods are also sugar laden. They have lots of sugar, which also increases the levels of bad bacteria. And that's a whole nother level. That's a whole nother story. I'll be talking about the dangers of the sugars that are being inundated with. Not only the white sugar, but the artificial sugars. So this is a tragedy. We need to do something about it, and each person has to stand up on their own. So let's get back to this slide on obesity, because there's so much we have to talk about, and time is limited. See, oh my goodness gracious, my friends. I have so much to share with you, and there's so little time left. But I'm going to be back next week again, sharing with you a lot of this stuff. So don't worry. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be sharing this stuff with you and bringing this information to you. But this slide is really good because I can really share with you the link between the bacteria in your gut and obesity in a very graphic way. And I'm going to go through each point with you next week. I promise you, I'll go into this slide in great detail and I'll share with you because, again, I can't believe it's already 8:54. My goodness gracious. Let me just take a few minutes just at least to share with you a couple things on this slide. The normal individual, the healthy individual, they have levels of the bacteria species, the type of bacteria called the Bacteroides. This is a class of bacteria. And the pattern, this is a pattern again. This is not like written in stone, but the pattern is that people who have healthy, normal weight have higher levels of these Bacteroides, and people who are overweight have higher levels of these Firmicutes, this other class of microorganisms that are, again, gram negative. They don't like they eat the fiber foods. They like to eat the animal protein. They like to eat the refined carbohydrates, the sugary foods. Whereas the bacteroides, they like the fiber foods. They like the plant-based foods. So these beneficial bacteria, the bacteroides, they break down fiber to make the short chain fatty acids that I've been talking with you about. These are beneficial compounds that we need desperately to help our metabolism. So these bacteroides bacteria produce beneficial compounds, whereas the Firmicutes, the gram-negative, produce the harmful compounds like the LPSs I talked about, which are very toxic. And I actually did a presentation on the lipopolysaccharides, and I did a whole hour presentation on all the deleterious effects that these harmful compounds that the bad bacteria create and develop inside the body. And maybe after we finish, or maybe I'll include it in the Gut 911 series, because you really need to see the devastation that the compounds from these harmful bacteria cause. Okay, my friends. Well, I'd love to dive more into this, but I'd like to keep on target with the time with you and respect your time. So you can go to my Facebook group at the Other Side of Medicine. You can go to my YouTube channel. You can go to any number. You can go to Dr. James Christosik on Facebook. You can go to the Other Side of Medicine on Facebook. You can go to these channels on YouTube. The Other Side of Medicine, Dr. James Christosik, and you'll find this episode as well as the other episodes that I've done over the past year here now on the Other Side of Medicine on the podcast. Tell your family and friends about us. I have so much more to share with you. We really need you to, when you go to Facebook, when you go to YouTube, to like and subscribe to my channel. Leave a comment. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. I love to have interaction with you. And it's just really important that you share this information and you like my either YouTube or Facebook channels, and it'll get more people to learn about these things. We need to share this information. People are dying and desperate for this information. And as you can tell, I have a passion. I have a passion for this whole topic. I have a passion to help people to become independently healthy, and I want that for you. So my friends, may the good Lord bless you. Until next week, I'm Dr. Christosik, aka Dr. J. Ciao for now. Thanks for listening.